Have you ever felt the creeping dread of knowing something is fundamentally wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it? Imagine living your perfectly ordinary life, your evenings filled with the comforting hum of your own solitude, the gentle glow of a screen, the quiet rhythm of your breath. Everything is normal, predictable, safe. Then out of the blue, a tiny, insidious crack appears in that normalcy, and through it, something utterly terrifying begins to seep. This is the kind of story that makes you check your locks twice before going to bed. So before the story truly begins, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening, drop your city and local time in the comments. And if you've had a similar creepy encounter, share it below. Maybe your story will inspire the next one. Now turn off the lights if you dare. Ignore the noises your house makes in the silence. And let's find out together what truly hides in the darkness. My life, for the most part, was meticulously structured, almost boringly so. I'm a remote graphic designer, which means my days blend into a comfortable hum of client emails, creative briefs, and the occasional coffee break that stretches into an hour of scrolling. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of an old brick building, the kind with high ceilings and creaky floorboards that tell stories of decades past. My evenings were a sacred ritual. Dinner may be a show, a chapter or two of a book, and then bed. I cherished the silence, broken only by the distant city murmur, because it was a stark contrast to the constant mental chatter of my work. My phone, a necessary evil, usually sat on its wireless charger on my bedside table, screen face down, set to Do Not Disturb after 9 p.m. A small detail perhaps, but it's crucial to understanding how easily everything began to unravel. It was a Tuesday night, late September. I'd had a particularly demanding project and was finally winding down around 11:30 p.m. I remember yawning, already half asleep, when my phone vibrated, lighting up the dim room. Immediately, I bristled. No one sane calls that late, especially not when they know I'm usually asleep. I picked it up, ready to silence it without even checking the caller ID, assuming it was a spam call that somehow bypassed my filters. But then I saw it, unknown number. Annoyed, I swiped to dismiss, only to find a new voicemail notification pop up instantly. I hesitated. Voicemails from unknown numbers usually mean telemarketers or someone trying to sell me extended car warranties. But there was a strange, almost insistent pull to this one. Against my better judgment, I tapped to listen. The usual automated voice droned, first new message, and then it played. It wasn't static, wasn't a hang-up. It was a sound that iced me from the inside out. A child's voice. Young, maybe 5 or 6, and distorted, as if speaking through a cheap tin can or from a great distance. It wasn't crying or laughing. It was just whispering. The words were barely audible, lost in a low, grating hiss. Find me. That was all I could make out. 3 tiny words, strung together by something that sounded like rustling leaves or faint static. The message lasted maybe 3 seconds. I listened again, my heart doing a nervous little flutter against my ribs. Find me. It was unsettling, to say the least. My first thought was that it was a prank call, some kids messing around. I dismissed it, telling myself that someone must have dialed a wrong number, probably a parent trying to prank their friend. I deleted the voicemail, put the phone back down, and tried to go to sleep. But the image of that glowing screen, the faint echo of those tiny, distorted whispers from the dark, lingered in the back of my mind. It was a bizarre, one-off anomaly, or so I told myself. The next night, Wednesday, it happened again. Same time, almost to the minute, 11:32 p.m. Same unknown number, same immediate voicemail. This time, I didn't even try to dismiss the call. I just went straight to the voicemail. Again, the child's voice, a little clearer this time, less distorted, but still carrying that eerie, distant quality. He's watching you. This time, the message was longer, perhaps 5 seconds, and seemed to hold a desperate urgency. My breath hitched. This wasn't a wrong number. This wasn't a random prank. This was personal. My serene apartment, which I always considered my sanctuary, suddenly felt exposed. I walked to my window and peered out into the street below, seeing only the usual empty street, wet from a recent drizzle, reflecting the amber glow of streetlights. No shadowy figures, no cars idling mysteriously, nothing. A prickle of genuine fear began to crawl up my spine. My mind raced through possibilities. Had I offended a client? Was this some elaborate, twisted joke by an old college friend? I scoured my memory for any recent encounters, any reason someone would target me, but I came up empty. My life was so utterly unremarkable, so devoid of drama, that the idea of a sinister plot against me seemed absurd. I even began to question my own perception. Was I just overly tired? Was the stress of work making me imagine things or misinterpret harmless static as words? The thought that I might be losing my mind was almost as terrifying as the voice itself. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? "Officer, an unknown child's voice is leaving cryptic whispers on my phone late at night. They tell me to block the number or get a new phone." I didn't even have a number to block, just unknown. I tried checking my call history through my provider's online portal, hoping for some digital breadcrumb, but it simply showed restricted number or private call for those specific times, no actual digits. It was a digital dead end. For the next few nights, the pattern continued relentlessly. 11:30 p.m., unknown number, child's voice, each message a little more distinct, a little more unsettling, and always cryptic. Friday night, "Don't go outside." Saturday night, "He's coming soon." The word "he" began to haunt me. Who was he? What was he coming for? And why was this child, this disembodied voice, the conduit for these chilling warnings? The routine of my quiet evenings was utterly destroyed. I found myself anticipating the call, dreading its arrival, yet unable to resist listening. My phone, once a tool of connection and work, had become a harbinger of dread, a direct line to something unseen and malevolent. I started leaving my phone on silent, hoping that if I didn't hear it ring, it wouldn't feel real. But the voicemails were still there, waiting for me in the morning, silent digital packages of terror. Waking up to a notification that read "one new voicemail" became a moment of pure anxiety each day. I even considered changing my phone number, but then a new thought struck me. If this person or entity went to such lengths to hide their identity, changing my number might not stop them. It might just make them try harder or find another way to reach me. The thought was paralyzing. These weren't just random calls anymore. These were intentional, targeted messages, delivered with a chilling consistency. The whispers from the dark were no longer a nuisance. They were a persistent, terrifying presence in my life, slowly eroding my sense of safety and sanity. The whispers from the dark started to color every aspect of my life. My focus at work dwindled, my appetite waned, and the comfortable silence of my apartment began to feel less like peace and more like a suffocating void, filled with the echo of those tiny, chilling words. I'd catch myself staring at my phone, willing it not to ring, then immediately dreading the morning when I'd find yet another voicemail waiting. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford, haunted by the possibility that he was indeed coming soon, and I had no idea who he was or what his arrival would mean. One particularly grueling night, after another message that simply said, "Look under the bed," I snapped. I got up, heart pounding, and flung myself onto my knees, peering into the dusty darkness beneath my mattress, half expecting to see a pair of glowing eyes or a pale, skeletal hand reaching out. Of course, there was nothing but dust bunnies and a lost slipper, but the sheer terror of that moment, the way my mind immediately went to the most horrific scenario, made me realize I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to understand. I needed answers. My first logical step, beyond the futile attempt to block an unknown number, was to investigate the voicemails themselves. I realized I had been deleting them reflexively, in an attempt to erase the experience. But what if there was a clue hidden within the audio itself? I decided to save the next one. That night, precisely at 11:30 p.m., the familiar vibration rattled my bedside table. I held my breath, watching the screen light up with unknown number, and then the instant voicemail notification. I waited until morning, the message a digital sword of Damocles hanging over my head. The next morning, with a cup of strong coffee providing a semblance of courage, I retrieved the voicemail. This one was different. The child's voice was clearer than ever, less tinny, almost as if it were standing closer to the microphone. "He wants your light." The words were punctuated by a faint, almost imperceptible sigh, and then an odd, rhythmic click, like a distant clock ticking, or maybe something else entirely. I listened to it repeatedly, probably 20 times, trying to decipher every nuance. I even downloaded the audio file to my computer and ran it through an audio editing program, hoping to amplify anything hidden in the background noise. My apartment was utterly silent, but in the amplified audio, I could hear what sounded like distant traffic, a dog barking, and then faintly, a sound that made my blood run cold. The faint, distinct chimes of a grandfather clock. It was so subtle, so buried in the static that I almost missed it. This detail, specific and unexpected, gave me a jolt. Grandfather clocks aren't common anymore, especially in modern apartments. It suggested an older setting, perhaps a house. My mind immediately connected it to the whispers from the dark, painting a picture of a dimly lit, old room where this child was trapped, making these calls. I started meticulously logging the times of the calls, the specific phrases, and any background noise I could discern. I even searched online forums, desperately hoping someone else had reported similar occurrences. Nothing substantial, just a few scattered posts about spam calls that weren't quite the same. The ambiguity of the situation, the lack of any concrete evidence, began to gnaw at me. Was I overthinking this? Was it just a very sophisticated, cruel prank? The calls continued, each one adding another layer of dread. "Your key is important. Don't trust the man in the green coat." The mention of a specific item or a person, however vague, felt like a direct intrusion into my reality. I didn't own a green coat, nor did I know anyone who routinely wore one, but it still made me hyper-aware, scanning faces in the rare instances I left my apartment for groceries. The constant feeling of being watched, of being the target of some unseen entity, was slowly eroding my sanity. I felt like a character in a bad horror movie, and I had no script. I started to notice small things. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of old wood and something vaguely floral that would sometimes linger in my apartment air, even when my windows were closed. It was a detail I hadn't noticed before, and it made me wonder if the whispers from the dark had a physical presence beyond just my phone. One night the voicemail was exceptionally brief, just 2 words, delivered with a chilling clarity that seemed to bypass the usual static. "He's here." My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Here, in my apartment, I froze, listening. The floorboards above me creaked, a sound I usually dismissed as my upstairs neighbor. But tonight it sounded like a slow, deliberate step. Every shadow in my small living room seemed to deepen, to take on a malevolent form. I gripped the heavy wooden rolling pin I kept in my kitchen drawer, my knuckles white, and slowly, cautiously, I moved towards my front door, peering through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway light was off as usual. No one was there. My neighbor's door was closed. I spent the rest of that night huddled on my sofa, the rolling pin clutched in my lap, unable to sleep, unable to even breathe normally. The experience was transformative. I realized the calls weren't just warnings. They were an interactive game, a psychological torment designed to break me. The child's voice was leading me somewhere, pushing me towards a confrontation, or perhaps a revelation. The specificity of "he's here" made me question everything. My locked doors, my secure windows, my very perception of safety. I even started to wonder if the calls were coming from within my own building, a neighbor with a cruel sense of humor, or something far, far worse. The next message was the most cryptic yet, and it solidified my resolve to act. It was delivered with a strained, almost pained whisper, the child's voice sounding genuinely scared this time. "The old well, in the forest, remember." The message repeated "remember" twice as if pleading. A forest, an old well. This threw me for a loop. I lived in the city. There were no forests nearby, no old wells that I knew of. My grounding detail of living in a city apartment crumbled. This sounded like something from a completely different world, something out of a fairy tale or a nightmare. But then a memory, a faint flicker from my distant childhood, surfaced. A family photo album I hadn't looked at in years, tucked away in a box in my closet. A faded picture of me as a small child, standing next to a moss-covered stone well, shaded by towering trees. My grandmother's old house, a place I hadn't visited since I was 7. I could almost smell the damp earth and pine needles. The hair on my arm stood on end. How could this child know about that? The calls were no longer just whispers from the dark. They were a voice from my past, a key unlocking forgotten fears. This wasn't just a random act of terror. This was deeply, terrifyingly personal, and I knew with a sickening certainty that I had to go. The memory of that old well, murky and almost forgotten, slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. My grandmother's house had been sold decades ago after she passed, and I hadn't thought about it since. It was in a small, remote town, surrounded by dense woods, a far cry from my current city life. The logical part of my brain screamed at the absurdity of it all. How could a child leaving cryptic messages on my phone know about a specific, deeply personal landmark from my childhood? What was the connection? The rationalizations I had clung to, wrong number, prank, stress-induced hallucination, shattered into a million pieces. This was real, this was targeted, and it was leading me back to a place I had deliberately left behind. The ambiguity of whether I was truly sane or not finally lifted, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I had to go. I spent the next day preparing, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was preparing for. I packed a small bag with essentials, a flashlight, a portable power bank, a first aid kit, and a small, sturdy utility knife. I told my boss I needed a few days off for a family emergency, intentionally vague. I didn't tell anyone where I was going or why. The thought of explaining this terrifying saga to a friend or family member felt impossible. They would think I was insane. Before I left, I listened to that last voicemail again, the child's desperate plea to remember resonating in my gut. The old well, the forest. It all connected to my past, but why was it only coming to light now, through these unsettling whispers? The drive was long, nearly 4 hours into the countryside. The familiar landmarks slowly gave way to winding roads, dense canopies of trees, and a pervasive silence that spoke of isolation. My phone reception became spotty, adding an extra layer of anxiety. I arrived in the small town, barely more than a cluster of houses and a general store, just as dusk began to fall. The old house was still there, though it looked weathered and abandoned, its windows boarded up, its paint peeling like sun-scorched skin. I parked a little way down the gravel road, out of sight, and killed the engine. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. I knew the layout of the property from memory. The well was deep in the woods behind the house, an old, hand-dug structure that my grandmother had warned me about as a child. "Never go near it alone, dear," she'd say, her voice stern. "It's a lonely place, and some things should stay buried." I remember dismissing it as an old wives' tale, but now her words echoed with a chilling new meaning. Armed with my flashlight, I ventured into the woods. The trees grew thicker here, their branches intertwining to form a dense canopy that blocked out the last vestiges of daylight. The air grew colder, damp and heavy with the scent of decaying leaves and wet earth. Every snapping twig, every hoot of an owl sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept my phone in my hand, half expecting it to ring, half dreading it. No calls came, but now the lack of the whispers from the dark was almost more unsettling. It felt like the entity was waiting, watching me approach its lair. After about 15 minutes of navigating the increasingly dark and overgrown path, my flashlight beam cut through the gloom and landed on it. The old well. It stood almost exactly as I remembered it, a squat stone cylinder covered in moss and ivy, its wooden lid rotted and half-collapsed. A heavy, palpable sense of dread emanated from it, an ancient sadness that seemed to seep into the very air around me. This was it, the source, or at least the destination. My hands trembled as I approached. I shone my flashlight down the dark opening, but the beam couldn't penetrate the inky blackness. It felt impossibly deep, a mouth leading to nowhere. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely a tremor in the vast silence. Only the echo answered. I thought about the child's voice, the almost physical presence of the whispers from the dark, and a terrible thought occurred to me. What if the child wasn't calling me from here but was here? What if it was trapped? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I had come this far. I had to know. I knelt, pushing aside the crumbling wood of the lid, and leaned in closer, shining my light again. This time I noticed something else, something I hadn't seen in the initial shock. Fastened to the inside of the well, just below the lip, was a small, rusted metal box, half hidden by overgrown weeds. It was old, clearly not part of the original well structure, and looked like it had been crudely bolted there. With a surge of renewed fear and desperate curiosity, I reached in and pried it open. Inside, nestled amongst dry leaves and cobwebs, was a single, meticulously folded piece of parchment. It looked ancient, brittle with age. My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped it. I carefully unfolded it, my flashlight beam illuminating the faded ink. It wasn't a map, or a letter, or a diary entry. It was a drawing, a child's drawing, crudely rendered but unmistakably clear. It depicted a stick-figure child, small and sad, holding hands with a larger, shadowy figure. Above the child's head, there were faint scribbles that looked like a speech bubble, containing the words, "He wants your light." The exact phrase from one of the voicemails. And then at the bottom of the drawing, scrawled in a different hand, a more adult, elegant script that made my blood run cold. "The whispers will find you. You are next." My entire body went rigid. The drawing wasn't a plea from a trapped child. It was a message, a warning that had been left there for someone to find, perhaps for me to find, for decades. The child's voice on my phone wasn't a separate entity, but a conduit, a mimicry, a chilling echo orchestrated by something else. "He wants your light." It wasn't about a physical light, but my life force, my essence. The man in the drawing, the shadowy figure, he was the he the child had been warning me about. And the note, left by an adult hand, meant someone else had been here, had known about this, had perhaps even been a victim. I dropped the drawing, stumbling back from the well, my mind reeling. The air felt thick, heavy with an unseen presence. My phone, which had been silent all this time, suddenly vibrated violently in my pocket. I fumbled for it, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a call, it was a text message from an unknown number. My hands shook so much I almost couldn't read the screen. It simply said, "Found you." And then seconds later, another message, this one a single word, "Welcome." A cold, unseen hand seemed to grip my shoulder. The faint floral scent I'd sometimes detected in my apartment was suddenly strong, overwhelming. The grandfather clock chimes, which I'd heard in the background of the voicemail, now seemed to echo from the very depths of the well, not faint at all, but loud and resonant, as if ringing out in my own mind. I scrambled to my feet, terror lending me a desperate surge of adrenaline. This wasn't over. It had just begun. The whispers from the dark had stopped calling because they no longer needed to. They had led me right to them. I fled, running blindly through the dark woods, the chilling message, "You are next," screaming in my mind, the scent of the floral perfume clinging to me like a shroud. I didn't know what he was or what he wanted, but I knew I was now inextricably linked to this darkness, and that my quiet, mundane life was gone forever. I don't know how long I ran, or how I found my way back to the car. My memory of that night is a blur of pounding feet, ragged breaths, and the oppressive, suffocating darkness of the woods. I remember driving away, not caring about speed limits, just needing to put as much distance between myself and that well as possible. The floral scent, sweet and cloying, lingered in my car, in my clothes, in my hair, a constant reminder. When I finally reached my apartment, the silence was no longer comforting. It was menacing. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak of the old building sounded like a footstep. I changed my phone number immediately, but it felt futile. The text messages, "Found you" and "Welcome," still burned into my mind. I deleted them, but their impression remained, an invisible tattoo on my psyche. I never saw another unknown number, never received another cryptic voicemail. The whispers from the dark had stopped, but their silence was terrifying in itself. It was the silence of a predator who has cornered its prey, the quiet before the final strike. Weeks have turned into months. I've moved, changed cities, tried to erase every trace of my old life, but the terror doesn't fade. I still check locks obsessively, jump at unexpected sounds, and find myself staring into mirrors, wondering if I look different, if he has already marked me in some subtle way. The child's drawing, its crude figures and chilling message, haunts my waking thoughts and invades my dreams. I still wonder about the other person, the one who left the note. The whispers will find you. You are next. Were they a victim too? What happened to them? And the well, the old well in the forest. I envision it often, a dark mouth waiting to swallow secrets, or perhaps to spit them back out. The truth of that night, the true nature of he, remains unclear, a horrifying, gaping void in my understanding. I don't know what he wants with my light, but I live every day with the chilling certainty that the threat isn't gone, it's just waiting. And sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world outside my window is perfectly still, I think I can almost hear it again, that faint, tinny voice, whispering from the dark, just beyond the reach of my understanding. A chilling echo, a promise of a nightmare that has yet to truly begin.